huge amount of development. And why is educated unemployment rate so high? Well, a number of explanations are given, but still it is a puzzle. And why women's workers' participation rate is so low and is decreasing. And this is really an issue that we need to address. There are also a number of new questions about employment that we face. One is that what is the role of skilling in employment generation? Some years ago, this may sound as an ancient wisdom, but I thought that there was a study by Kenneth Arrow which said that education's role is really nothing but filtering out people. If you've done a PhD, that means doesn't show anything how you learn, but it shows that you have the tenacity to pursue something for a number of years. And that disciplined approach and tenacity is what employers value. There was another thesis, I think, for my friend and colleague, Professor, and guide also, Professor Richard Eckers had done, that was also long ago, where it showed that most people learn on the job in the first 3 months what they have to do on the job. Training is the most critical aspect of it. So how do we skill people? Is it really important to provide them specific technical knowledge or not? Or how do we make them able to learn on the job and at time? And so that ability to learning is what we should really be teaching in some sense. But I think this thing is becoming even more complicated because in the ICT dominated economy, the information and communication technology dominated economy, ability to learn, ability to change things, ability to do different things is going to be extremely critical. How to recover employment when MSMEs have lost a huge amount of ground, and this is due to demonetization was one shot, followed by COVID, and then the implementation of GST, which was not coherently worked out in some sense. And the social science research can throw light on these things. I think researchers have explored, as I said, many of these issues, but we need focus and concentrated efforts to get some clearer understanding of these issues. And I feel that so central government has not given adequate attention to social science research. Like, for example, the total central government grants, and I have explored only 4 different institutions: CSIR, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research; ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research; ICSSR, and UGC. And if you see the lowest one, the red line and the gray line, is ICSSR, which is getting less than just about 1% of the total grant the central government gives to all these institutions for research. And this ICSSR is the principal funder of research in the country. It supports a number of research institutions. Even if you consider that the states supplement this, the amount of research money that is going to social science is extremely limited. And I think there is one thing we should keep in mind, that government subsidies and support is critical and vital for social science research, because social science research cannot be easily monetized like engineering research or science research or medical research, that people can get a patent on it and companies make profit so that companies can support it. But this is not likely to happen in social science research, and therefore it is the government should really increase the support given to it. I think a minimum increase should be at least 10-fold of what we are currently spending. I think we face an important issue with all these demographic uncertainties about employment and so on, that is India going to reap demographic dividend or face demographic nightmare? And this is the issue I want to explore now. First of all, what is demographic dividend? I think as defined by the United Nations Population Fund, is that the economic growth potential that can result from shifts in a population's age structure, mainly when the share of the working age population 15 to 64 is larger than non-working age share of the population, that is 14 and younger or 65 and older, because then the amount of money required to support this other is reduced and that your larger surplus becomes possible. A country with both increasing number of young people and declining fertility has the potential to reap demographic dividend. That's what UNFPA has suggested. I think the mechanism for demographic dividend is quite clear. You know, your GDP per capita grew by 2,200% in South Korea between 1950 and 2008. And in Thailand, it grew by 980% over these years, largely because there were more workers, they were employed, they produced more. That invites investment. Then newer investment brings investment per person increases, and also new investment brings knowledge, experience, and technology, particularly when it is integrated with the world. So productivity increases, income grows, fertility comes down, and growth accelerates. And this is roughly the kind of story we can tell about many countries in the world. And some idea of which countries have scope for demographic dividend in large economies. Japan had from 1964 to 2004, Italy from 1984 to 2002. But the important thing I want to show you is that India, 2018 to 2055, is a 35-year window we have of reaping demographic dividend. I think we lost some time in COVID-19 pandemic when the economic growth slowed down and even employment went even further and plummeted. So the bottom graph here shows what is the India's dependency ratio, which was as high as almost 81.5 in 1970 and became just about 49.8 in 2020. So I think we have a demographic dividend window of these 9 years. I think on the face of it, we should be reaping this benefit to 2055. For that, I think we need to create jobs. Well, thank you. Thank you, Manish. Well-paying jobs, because jobs have to be really well-paying to have some surplus generated to bring more investment and so on, and which requires skills of the right kind, and that which requires education and quality education, so that you are really becoming somewhat more adaptive in a fast-changing global environment with unprecedented rate of technological development. And this really is very critical, that you feel obsolete. I started programming in 1957 at MIT. One of the first large computer was there, and my first program written was in what's called share assembly language, even before Fortran was invented. Today, with the new technology and other things, sometimes I feel obsolete and cannot manage the kind of things that you need to do and understand in working in this area. So I think it's really important that, and even though I have been working on it all these years, so that it is really critical to be able to adapt and to learn. I think creating jobs is the first priority, and exports, I think, are critical for it, because large countries have grown employment rapidly on the base of manufacturing exports, and we have seen that for many, many things. India for many years followed what we call an import substitution strategy, and it made sense in 1947 because India was a large country. Looking back 30 years from 47, you would have noticed that exports, global exports, have hardly grown over this year. The large country, if you then do export promotion, you feel that the terms of trade will turn against you and that you won't gain anything. So for the first few years, we felt that really import substitution is the right thing to do. in a sense, we should have changed that policy in 1960s because we could have seen that the world exports in the world in the 50s grew tremendously, and that we could have really gained much more and not worried about adverse movement of terms of trade. I think Prime Minister Indira Gandhi tried to change the direction in mid-60s. She devalued the Indian rupees, which was from 5 rupees to 7.5 rupees or so, became, and then wanted to liberalize things. And if you liberalize this, what happens is in the early years, imports go up because exports take time to develop and capacity. And so we had immediately short-term foreign exchange crisis. IMF and the World Bank had promised to provide bridge loans to go over this period, but under the pressure from US President, I think it was Lyndon Johnson, who didn't like Mrs. Gandhi's arrogance, what he felt or whatever it is, that not supporting him fully in the Vietnam efforts and so on, so that he put pressure on IMF and the World Bank, and they backtracked and did not provide this. And Mrs. Gandhi said, I'm never going to listen to this free market economist again, and so on. And she turned back in some sense. And that's the sad part, because we continued more or less with import substitution till 1990, in less in some sense and more, but we kept on having various kinds of controls on exports. But I mean, look at what others have gained. Korea, with a population of 1/20th that of India, exported more than India, even as you know, and Korea's per capita GDP is today more than 15 times that of India. The total exports of Korea were more than that of India, even though Korea's size was 1/20th that of India over all these years. And you can see that Korea has now become, more than is a member of a developed country club, and so on. And it is not just Korea. China also had, with demographic dividend, stepped up its GDP. China's GDP in 2020 was 20 times its GDP in 1980. India and China had the same GDP per capita in 1970. And that whereas India is only 7 times as large. And so we have missed the bus in many, many ways, but can we catch up? And unfortunately, employment continues to be our major problem. The potential of women workers has not been fully utilized. India is one of the few countries in the world where women's work participation rate has fallen sharply from 29% in 2004 to 17% in 17-18. And I think for rural men, ages 25 and 29, between 2004 and 5 and 17-18, casual labor declined by about 6 percentage points. However, this decline is counterbalanced by regular salaried work, which increased by 4 percentage points. Not fully counterbalanced, but somewhat counterbalanced. In contrast, women's casual work declined by 9 percentage points, while the regular salaried work increased by a mere 1 percentage point. So that you can just see that there has been a strong bias. And this is understandable. If there is not enough employment growth, people usually give first preference, I don't know why, but they do, to male workers, and female workers get a secondary, with a second choice. The level of unemployment, if you look at it, is also very, very different. Female unemployment rate is much larger, even though their work participant rate is lower. Unemployment rate goes up with education, and this is also another puzzle. Well, not quite a puzzle, one can understand in some sense, but so on, you can see that there is a large increase in unemployment and people have a graduate plus degree. And two reasons can be offered. One is that the poor at the very lowest education level are too poor to remain unemployed. They must work. They work at whatever wage and that is available to them, and they get themselves employed. On the other hand, graduates or above can be choosy. They want a certain kind of work, and the kind of distortion we have put in the labor market, that if you're a regular employee in a sarkari job, you get lots of benefits and perquisites, and though you have a lifetime security of employment, the wages are higher than if you were to work outside. And I remember a story that the late Raj Krishna used to tell. He was, I think, director of Agricultural Center at Indira Institute of Economic Growth. And he says one day the gardener comes and says, "That is a small garden. कि साहब कोई दूसरा माली रखना पड़ेगा." तो कहा क्यों, क्या बात है, तुम रिटायर हो रहे हो? नहीं साहब, अभी तो मैं परमानेंट हो गया. So he permanent, he said he doesn't have to work anymore. So I think in that kind of an environment, certainly graduates are seeking similar jobs where they can get all the benefits and perquisites of lifetime employment and no obligation to work. I think, in a sense, education has been our greatest failure. You know, if in 2021, male 82.1% and female was 65.5% was literacy. China has reached literacy level over 90% in 1990. So we are really almost, even after 30 years, we haven't caught up with China in that sense. And the mean years of schooling is merely double from 1980 to 2011, subsequent, from 1.9 to 4.4%. So I think we have not really done as well as we should and could have done. One can say, what could one have done? I think each one teach one was what Sanjay Gandhi said. He was right in some sense, but he was a total autocratic and power-drunk guy. So we alienated lots of people, and really we saw no desire. But I think if each one teach 10, if a call was given in 1947, with fervor of independence, I think it would have worked. Nehru would have given that call, and lots of people would have gone, and certainly, there was a desire to do something for the country and so on. And I'm sure that could have really brought literacy to a very high level in a very short time. Even now, our allocations for health and education are much below what they should be. I mean, we've been arguing for many years that it should be at least 6% of the GDP, but it has been less than that for all these years. It's around 4% even today. If we had spent, I've done some simulations some years ago, that if we had spent $5 billion a year from 1975 to 1985, making education compulsory. And I said, okay, this is compulsory, women get educated, and the National Fertility Health Survey regressions we had made for UP and Madhya Pradesh, we had shown that fertility rate is very closely related to women's education. So going to women's education, simulating this, we could have shown that by 2000, we would have had 100 million fewer people, and of course, much higher per capita GDP and all the other benefits would have been there. But we didn't do that. I think there is another challenge, that is growth in tomorrow's world, changing demographic working age. That is, in many countries, the workers are going to work from not 15 to 64, but maybe 20 to 70 or so on. So what happens is that our ability to export to other countries may be adversely affected in some sense. I think, on the other hand, we would see an increase or stretching out of the window for demographic dividend. I think the changing nature of technology is very critical. You know, we are having a lot of effort in biotechnology is on a breakthrough moment, and the ecology and the information technology and biotechnology together can transform the ecology of employment. You will, you know, the kind of people we will not, jobs people are doing currently might disappear. Computers, algorithms, robots, etc. may replace humans in a large area of human endeavor. And I think we have to think about the kind of creative jobs and other things that we can run. You know, today I can buy a silk tie, for example, in Khadi Bandar or somewhere for maybe 800, 900 rupees. If I put a P on it, then that sells for $800, $900 or even more. And that is really the crux of today's consumer world. And I think we really think about what is it that we need to train people in, and how we do this. Have we missed the bus? Is DD obsolete and passé? We will need to innovate and be creative. And this is really very, very critical that we are able to do that. What facilitates creativity and innovation? I think freedom to think, differ, and disagree is very, very critical, because unless you are used to differing and disagreeing, you will not think out of the box. You cannot think that everyone should have a ideological straitjacket, that I would not think anything outside what the guru or the imam says, or what the political imam says. And so you really want to be able to think, challenge, and do innovation if you want to do that, even in these kind of areas. And I think venture capital, not just to finance, but also to do part of the risk. Venture capital is very critical. Fortunately, in India now there has been venture capital. You know, in 1997, 98, I told, I think, chairman of ICI, I forget his name, famous man. Okay, well, Kamath, that yes, you know, we need to have a venture capital fund, because we must really support venture capitalism. So he set a venture capital fund which gave loans to people without any collateral. So young fellows who have done innovation can get a loan without any collateral. But he charged 20% interest rate. So I think it really did not serve the purpose. In those days, way back in the 90s, US venture capital funds would buy a part of the stock in they shared the risk and so on. And that created lots of venture capital successes in the United States. And venture capitalists support me with 10 funds, 10 efforts, out of which maybe one or two may be a unicorn, and give them more than enough to compensate for the others. So, I mean, if you had bought a share of Infosys for maybe 100 rupees 30 years from now, and even within 10 years, it will become very large. So I think it is that kind of investment and innovation that was required. Today, at least, this is happening in India, and we have at least that part in good shape. I think we have, in some sense, a very fertile area for creativity. We have democracy, which is at least supposed to give people freedom to think and choice. We are, unfortunately, till recently, many were just doing rote learning, and all this emphasis on common test, even position to having 15% of the marks for interviews in St. Stephen's College in Delhi for admission is being opposed by people who say, no, you must really give everyone on the basis of their performance in the CUET or whatever it is called, QET. And I think that all promotes rote learning. Today, if you see the advertisement every day on newspapers, first page of Times of India, Delhi, Indian Express, etc., are always full of these training institutions who really do nothing but make you, rote learning is what it is saying. And I think we have a rigid caste system only gradually crumbling. And I think entrepreneurial freedom has increased. Venture capital is now available, unicorns are rising. Free thinking and behavior are unfortunately under threat. And I think this is really a sad part of the story. I think we can reap the dividend, demographic dividend, if we provide quality education to all, rich and poor, boys and girls, now, not 10 or 15 years down the line. That we make exporting easy. Even though we may have a comparative advantage, there are the cost of getting your product to the on ship to be exported, about the hurdles that you have to cross are many, and that's really what creates. I think we need to remove all procedural hassles, increase ease of doing business. Ease of doing business is one thing, but ease of getting out of business is also very critical. Because if you want to do new things, you want to not only do something, but also get out if it fails. There is a story that Tandon, I think it was named, who was manufacturing floppy disks. Some of you may not have seen it, but that used to be computer disks which serve the purpose of what stick pans do today or so on. And even before this hard disk came, the floppy disks were very common. And this was used by IBM and all this. So Mrs. Gandhi persuaded this man to set up a factory in the Santa Cruz export promoting zone. And so he set it up, and 2 years down the line, the floppy disk was completely obsolete and was replaced by this hard disk. So he wanted to close this. But for 2 years, he could not close the factory and had to keep supporting the workers. So I think it is really, ease of closing down is still very difficult. I was a member of one of the NGO we had set up on the climate group. And the climate group went into liquidation. And the process of closing this has taken more than 2 years. So I think we still have, and this is, I'm talking about recent things. So I think it is important to have ease of doing business. I should have added ease of closing business also. And we need to provide healthcare to all. Ensure stable power supply 24/7 and clean cooking fuel to all. We are doing this Ujjwala scheme, which provides LPG subsidy to all women. But it's very difficult to provide LPG cylinders in the remote corners of the country. It's much lot simpler to provide stable electric supply. My wife Jyoti has always been arguing that electric cooking is the way to go. Not, it's a mix of LPG cylinders for peri-urban areas, pipe gas for dense urban cities, and give induction cookers to all. The cost would be the same as giving them gas stoves and other things. I think if we can do this, and you would avoid ideological straitjackets, and I keep coming on it again and again, which has become very important when we see the things that are happening in the country today, that then we can deep demographic dividend. Unemployment and social interest will explode otherwise, and we will have a demographic nightmare. So I hope, and for all of you, that we can avoid this. Thank you all.